Hi, my name is David Peterson. I'm the creator of the Dothraki language for HBO's Game of Thrones and the alien language and culture consultant for Sci-Fi's Defiance, and you're listening to GenreTainment.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of GenreTainment at SciFiPulseRadio.com. We're your hosts, Marks
and Julie. GenreTainment is where we talk about what's happening in the world of film, TV, and web series. We give you interviews with writers, directors, producers, and actors in both independent and not so independent creations. Now for this 99th episode, we chat with filmmaker and Conlang professional Britton Watkins.
Britton tells us how he became involved with Conlang, which stands for Constructed Languages, if we didn't know, which led him to learning fictional alien languages like Navi, Vulcan, Klingon, and creating his own languages for his science fiction film Senn. He also tells us how those skills landed him a job on Star Trek Into Darkness, and we learn about his upcoming feature documentary on Conlang called Conlanging.
We have an interesting and detailed discussion about constructed languages and the different types, then learn more about the documentary and take a behind-the-scenes look at the sci-fi film Senn. But before we get started with the interview, we should point out that the music you just heard at the beginning of the show was a snippet from the theme song for our web series, Reality on Demand. It was a song performed and composed by our friend Tishon Hardy. You can find our web series at realityondemandseries.com. Now let's get started with our interview with Britton Watkins. Well, hi, Britton. Welcome to GenreTainment.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, we are excited to talk to you about Conlang, your film Senn, and your upcoming documentary. So let's start off with how you first got involved with creating languages.
Well, that's a good question. You know, up until about 2010, the end of 2009, 2010, the appearance of Avatar in the Na'vi language, I really didn't do very much at all with constructed language. I knew that Conlangs existed. I knew there were people who were out there and who made them. Of course, I knew about Esperanto. I owned the original Klingon dictionary from the mid-'80s, but I did not actually get down and dirty with grammar and like make my own phonology or do anything like that until well after learning Na'vi from Avatar. That really didn't get kicked off then until 2010, 2011. So I've only been at it for 4 or 5 years or so.
Wow.
Well, and just in case people don't know, what's Esperanto?
Esperanto was originally conceived by Zamenhof in Europe over 100 years ago as a lingua franca for the whole world, an international language that everyone could learn and speak, and that would lead the world to a better place in terms of social mutual understanding and, honestly, you know, at some level, world peace. It was just imagined as a language that everyone in the world could easily learn. It has a relatively simple grammar compared to a lot of natural languages. It did enjoy a great deal of success. It still has many people who even speak it as a native language because they were born into a household where their parents met over some kind of Esperanto cultural exchange and ended up speaking Esperanto in the home. So we actually, in the upcoming documentary, will feature some people who speak it, and one person who speaks it fluently, natively, because it was spoken in her household from the time she was born.
I think that's really neat. I didn't realize how old it was. I thought it was newer than that. But wasn't there a movie that William Shatner did that was in Esperanto or something like that?
Yeah, it's called Incubus. It's a black and white film from the 60s, I believe. I'm not great with dates, but I'm pretty sure it was from the 60s, pre-Star Trek. And he's in Incubus speaking Esperanto, not always flawlessly, perfectly, but you can find that various places if you choose to do so, and see young Shat speaking a Conlang. a lot more than he ever did in Star Trek, that's for sure.
Does he speak it with Shatner accent?
Yeah, with the accent, the Shatner way.
I'll let people go judge for themselves about it. Whether he's fully realized as his
Shatnerism,
his Shatner-esque delivery. He's definitely acting. Let's put it that way.
So we threw a few other terms at people here. We threw Conlang and Natlang. So what's the difference between those two?
Natlang is a common abbreviation for a natural language. That is a language that evolved organically out of the human speaker base. And a conlang is a constructed language that was intentionally put together, intentionally constructed out of concepts and pieces and parts of the way typically that natural languages work. There are some people who do eng-langs or engineered languages that try to break the rules of natural languages or explore new territory. They go into the same way that you might go into theoreticals with physics or some other science. They try to push the boundary of what language can be. But typically a conlang takes features of existing human languages, the way we make sounds with our normal vocal tract, and the way we put concepts together. Human beings tend to do those in very, very different ways depending on what your natural language is, your first language, or the languages you're exposed to as a child. But anyway, a conlang is an intentionally constructed language. So conlang is the abbreviation of constructed language.
Okay, so I'm trying to wrap my head around the engineered language. How is that different than a constructed? You said it. So is that like a natural language? Is that like a natural language that they tweak?
An engineered language is typically something that tries to push a theoretical boundary. So an engineered language is a subset of a conlang. You can look at the term conlang or conlanging as an umbrella term for all different kinds of other languages. They're art langs, so languages that are developed for a specific artistic purpose. Most of the languages, certainly, that have been used in films, for example, are art langs. They were developed as an artistic enhancement to something that is a fiction or something that needs some kind of augmentation in terms of the linguistic tapestry side of what's going on. So there are art langs and eng-langs and aux-langs, auxiliary languages, which is what Esperanto is. It was conceived as something that would be auxiliary to natural languages, something that people would have as a second language probably, but that would connect them more readily with other people. So conlang is an umbrella term, and under that there are all kinds of other specializations. And people who would be into eng-langs, engineered languages, are probably also people who would be tend to be better at mathematics, or who would be, have tendencies towards other scientific approaches to viewing the world and understanding the world. So they tend to like to push boundaries. They tend to do things like logical languages, for example, or languages that look at distilling meaning down into categorizations or organizations and putting them together in very different ways that we don't do in everyday life, typically while we're shopping at the grocery store. It's a specific approach to building a language that might be used for everyday communication, but in most cases, in every case that I know personally, I haven't met anyone who is fluent in an engineered language. Yeah. They tend to be more exploratory.
So it's they take a logical approach to language, which doesn't generally.
It's like
exist.
If a robot made a language, right?
Yeah.
It could be as if a robot made a language, or I think the better way to look at it is, what if we discovered that an artificial intelligence, an artificial sentience had emerged in a robot or a robot community, and the robots were communicating with each other in a way that we can't do because we don't have the right kind of electronic impulses to do it? But what if we tried to find a common ground between the way a robot would communicate natively with another robot and how a human would communicate with another human? And what if we found a middle ground and we had to make up a language that the robots could get close enough to using and we could get close enough to using robot speak? That's more what an engineered language might be.
And your kitty's trying to tell you that we need to speak kitty cat.
Yeah, but
That's cute.
This kitty around here, I hope he doesn't contribute too much to the conversation. But
Are you kidding? We love it.
He's into loud langing, to meow lang very loudly.
Actually, when we were talking about logic, it made me laugh because I always said that I took German and I took Spanish in school, and I always thought German was easier than Spanish because to me, German is a lot more logical. And it's like you can graph it out a little bit more, and like I never could figure out like sometimes you put an accent mark in Spanish and sometimes you don't, and and then like and in German you have like for a shoe is das Schuh, but a glove is Handschuh because it's a hand shoe, and I love that kind of logic.
Well, there are different cultures tend to focus more on different things, and
Yeah.
some languages, for example, have a very different approach to time telling. Some languages are more specific about attribution. That is, they have to mark the evidentiality of where something came from. So when you say there's a bird on the tree, you need to mark somehow, sometimes it's on the verb, how you know that the verb is on the tree. There's a bird on the tree because I'm seeing it with my eyes right now, or there's a bird on the tree because someone I trust told me there's a bird on the tree.
Oh my
So
gosh.
some cultures tend to be more picky about certain things, and then other cultures are less picky about other things. And it just, in the conlanging world, people take this to extremes,
Well,
and
'cause
they
can,
imagine. Yeah, they imagine other creatures, for example, who are not human beings, who might have very, very different bodies. And those creatures might communicate in mechanisms that involve a combination of something that we might think of as speech and also color. If you can produce color off of tentacles on your head, then a word might be a combination of a sound and a bright orange pulse off of tentacle number 14. So it can be very, very theoretical and artistic and engineered and logical and really out there at the same time. So
now, what kind of conlang would it be if you created a sign language that was created?
Well, it would be a constructed language, and there are people actually who work now in creating languages that are for specific communities. For example, the blind and deaf community. If you're both blind and deaf and you need to communicate via your hands in some kind of way only because your eyes and your ears don't help, then they're tactile languages, and people who do research on this are working on that kind of thing right now too. So it's not always about science fiction and movies and whatnot.
Yeah.
It can have a really practical application.
That's
So,
interesting.
so conlanging is not just people playing around with funny sounds in their basement. There are a lot of practical applications too. And one day there really may need to be some kind of thought about communication between people and machines, depending on if machines do obtain some kind of intelligence, they may want to communicate in a very, very different way. So the fact that conlanging has kind of come beyond something like Esperanto that was conceived as good for the whole world and come out of the kind of shadows that Tolkien did it in, for example. He called it his secret vice to make up the Elvish languages.
Mm-hmm.
It's really coming into mainstream now. And a lot of the people I'm interviewing for my documentary film are very, very strong in science and mathematics, but also conlanging.
Mm-hmm.
I just spoke with a young guy yesterday who's just finished an honors governor's school program in science, and then he's going into statistics in the fall, but he has a constructed language, So the overlap of some people with a kind of artistic or romantic side for their constructed languages and other people with very kind of scientific or engineering focused applications is super interesting to me.
That is interesting.
Yeah, and so you brought up the documentary. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about the documentary and kind of where you're at on that currently, what the status is currently on it.
Well, the status is we've got a lot of hours of footage in the can. The documentary was conceived as my next project after having worked on a purely fictional science fiction project with my husband called Senn. Mm-hmm. And Senn was super interesting and fascinating to me, and there's a constructed language that I created in that film. It appears mainly visually in the film, but after that, I was interested in the format of documentary filmmaking. I hadn't done that before, and I thought as a subject matter, conlanging is super interesting to me. And I've met lots and lots of people who are involved in it over the past 4 or 5 years. So I started this project in the spring. So far, I've been able to film, I don't know, 30-ish, 40-ish people, and we're just keeping on with that. We're trying to show how broad and deep the landscape of conlanging is. And we'll be featuring people from all over the world, really, who do it, who come from all kinds of different linguistic backgrounds originally. And we're just doing one-on-one interviews and getting footage of all the fascinating artifacts that they create. Some of these people also do calligraphy. They're painters. They're filmmakers themselves. They do all kinds of stuff. And we're getting the kind of famous Hollywood conlangers too. In fact, people like Mark Alcorn and David Peterson and Paul Frommer, Christine Schreier, David Sallow, all people who've worked on the big sci-fi fantasy franchises for Hollywood, creating languages for those projects, have signed up to be producers in various producer roles on conlanging the film, the documentary. Mm-hmm. So it's super exciting for all of us to work together to show not only the famous side of conlanging, but the really you didn't know this was going on side of conlanging as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Well, and I do think that there's something to the notion that if people learn to better communicate through language, we understand each other better. It is kind of a shame that Esperanto hasn't gotten bigger than it is, really, because
well, in a lot of fantasy, like at least fantasy role-playing games, or also in some sci-fi stuff, they have a standard or common language.
That notion of all of us having some sort of common, because you can unintentionally even offend someone. You didn't even realize that what you were saying was offensive, but it's because of cultural differences that that ticked them off,
Right, yeah. And that's something that, that could still happen in Esperanto, of course, but communities, whether it's based in Esperanto or, I've made friends all over the world who speak Na'vi, and they learned it because of the film Avatar. So speech communities tend to self-select in some ways, too, for attributes that help people get along with each other. It certainly doesn't mean that everyone who speaks Esperanto today is culturally similar, but I think Esperanto probably would have done even better than it did, been more successful than it has been, if certain aspects of, geopolitical things had not happened the way they did. The two world wars, the role of England and the power of the United States as an English-speaking entity and player in geopolitics had a lot to do with the proliferation of English. I mean, not just the wars, but also the economics. Colonization, certainly, economics, all kinds of factors had to do with the proliferation of English. And if English had not come in and filled one of the voids that, Esperanto was supposed to fill, then it probably would have done a lot better.
Yeah. And also, it's also important to point out that, language is one way of communicating. There have been times where I've been with someone and we didn't have a common language, but we found ways to communicate and got along very well. And other times where, someone I have a English in common with as a native language, I couldn't share space with them for more than 5 minutes without wanting to rip their head off.
Exactly. I mean, the language as a tool is not an assurance of anything in terms of interaction. It's a lot about attitude as well. So we're going to show in our documentary that there are still some people. In fact, I interviewed a gentleman in Oakland, California, just a couple of days ago, who is trying to create a language. Well, he has created a language, a very big language, robust, with a very full vocabulary, that he would like to see proliferate across Western Africa. So in the east of Africa, they have Swahili as a common language
Yeah.
that people can use for commerce and other purposes. And Arabic tends to fill that void in the north of Africa, but he wants West Africa to adopt his language, which is, like an Esperanto, but one specifically intended for a large swath of multiple countries covering probably over 100 indigenous natural languages. So people are still doing this. People are still trying to find linguistic tools that will lubricate culture and economy in a good way. I understand the human drive to do it, but I also think that if you have a private language that is just for you, that makes you happy, or maybe you and a family member or you and a friend share together, then that's also super interesting and fascinating too. Not languages don't have to be envisioned as these important tools. They can also be playthings, and that's a completely valid thing for them to be.
Like
I think
twin languages.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, twin languages are fascinating because it is a spontaneous thing that a lot of twins do. There's research more recently that they also, though, you have to be careful with them, because if twins have a tendency to isolate from other family members and then other children, then it can lead to developmental delays in whatever their native language is in the home.
Right.
And that if it goes too long, it can translate over into, having problems in school. So there are examples of twin languages where the parents or, other professionals tried to work at breaking them away from that. But it is a fascinating phenomenon that private language or play language is something that, most families do it in some kind of way, even with making up pet names, or in my family, we use this word scranchipy. Do you have any idea what scranchipy might mean?
No.
Scranchipy means something is kind of tattered and old. It's kind of falling apart because maybe it wasn't well maintained.
Huh.
So it's very easy for a fabric or something that maybe has some flexibility to it to become scranchipy. And we use this in my family like we would use any other kind of word. We're much more likely to say, oh, hand me that scranchipy old rag, I'll mop up this oil spill or something, as opposed to saying, that tattered old rag or that rag that's falling apart. We use the word scranchipy and we know what it means. And that is actually conlanging. I mean, in a very, very tiny little way.
Well, but
to
it's
make
also
up
almost like a micro version of a regional dialect, too. I mean,
Right, exactly. Yeah. And again, some people within their conlangs then create multiple dialects, and they do diachronic change, phonological change over time. So after I hang up with you, I'm going to talk to a guy who's imagined what English would be like in the Northeast of the United States 1,000 years from now. So,
That's cool.
so it really is cool. I mean, what people do with constructed languages is super cool. And I'm finding something new every day, every time I talk to one of these new constructed language creators. So it's been a great journey so far. And we're probably about halfway there in terms of collecting footage and finalizing the film. We hope to get it done at the earliest by the very end of this year, but next year certainly. And very soon we'll be running a crowdfunding campaign as well. So please look for that if you're of a mind to support this project and get in early on it. You can go to conlangingfilm.com, and we will have all of the information about whatever crowdfunding platform we end up using and how we go about doing that. But I think some of the rewards will be interesting for people. So definitely check it out.
Now, I've been thinking recently about how the internet and social media, I think, is starting to sort of almost sanitize or sort of change a lot of what used to be regional dialects, at least I know in America. I know that just since I was a kid, the way things that we name things have changed a bit. Now I say like soda, but we used to, where I'm from, everything was a Coke. Like you go to a restaurant, you say, what kind of Cokes do you have? Well, we have a Pepsi, a Diet Pepsi, a Mountain Dew. And
Right.
everyone
Yeah.
knew that you meant a soft drink or a soda, or in some places they call it a pop.
Hmm.
And then, just things like that we used to, call different things. And I've noticed that over time. And like when I was growing up, a woman carried a purse, and I still say purse, but I've noticed younger adults and teenagers call it a bag or a handbag, because that's what they call it in New York and like LA. And
Hmm.
they've started, and now they'll have Facebook friends from places, and so they started calling these things. And so it's kind of odd that it's almost like I'm speaking a different dialect in my own hometown from people 10 years younger than me.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of strange. And I know that also a lot of native languages have died off, but it's almost like now there's that void. Does that kind of feel like that to you? Where there was this void, and then now sort of Conlang is kind of coming in and filling some of that?
I don't know about conlanging coming in and filling that. You just described several different things that happen in natural language evolution. So one, for example, is that young people do the evolution, right? They force the evolution usually through slang, and slang terms that then get adopted more broadly into general speech. So they would bring a word like sick, for example. I've only understood sick as meaning something good or positive for about 10 years now.
Yeah.
Before that, I had no idea that sick meant something to young people that was different than ill, like
Yeah.
vomiting. And the first time I learned it is when I learned it and really understood it natively, is the day that a young person who was about 12 years old saw my iPhone for the first time, like 2 days after it had been released. And they were looking at it and they called it sick. And I'm like, oh, I finally understand what sick means in that context. So, the word cool, for example, might be completely replaced by sick 100 years from now, and sick might be spelled differently. Sick might be spelled SIK, or SYK, and the spelling SYK will mean super cool or hot or, whatever, ill or whatever that, like whatever the current understanding
Dude,
of that
that's
is. So
totally ill looking.
yeah,
You never know.
we don't know what's going to happen 100 years from now. But the other thing is prestige dialects. So the fact that the term for a purse might change to bag or handbag or something like that is probably a prestige dialect, coming from the fact that the fashion industry in New York, for example, calls it a bag. So in the case of English, a lot of English comes from French because the Norman court in what is now the UK spoke French for a very, very long time. So because French was the prestige dialect spoken in the court in London, it became absorbed much more, or became a much more strong foundation for a lot of English vocabulary that we have today. So those things are facilitated certainly by the internet now. Historically, it would have been much slower for people in Scotland to start using anything that had French in it.
Well, and it would have been the upper echelons of society too, and eventually would have trickled down.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. But now, because of the egalitarian aspects of the internet and the fact that through tweeting and other things, average people can be communicating commonly with celebrities, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It's not hard to be in touch with George Takei. He doesn't necessarily respond to you, but you can easily reach out to him through different kinds of methodologies. And things like Twitter and Facebook and other internet platforms and communities facilitate the spread of language change much more rapidly than it used to happen. And it now extends very much to even spelling changes, So there's a lot of confusion now between whether we still need to spell UR with an apostrophe RE or not, like it's intelligible without spelling it
that I'm a grammar Nazi. That's just a nerve.
Well, but for young people who who are not explicitly taught the difference, and if they're texting exactly, everything may just eventually collapse into "you are," and "you are" may end up being the spelling for all kinds of different words. So it's again, we don't know what's going to happen, and the internet is still new to a lot of us who are in our 40s and 50s, but it's basically the only world that people in their 20s know. So
See,
so
you've touched on two of my nerves. I'm a grammar Nazi, and my fear of robots getting intelligent and taking over. I'm just saying this is a common theme.
Well, I definitely am not going to be implanted. I did get an Apple Watch recently, and it is reading my blood pressure right now. But
I don't even have a cell phone.
Yeah, well, yeah. But I draw the line at implantation.
Crazy.
Yeah, I'm going to draw the line at implantation.
Yeah,
so I'm not going to be chipped. I've decided no matter what kind of features are available.
No, I don't care. I'm going off the grid and living in the woods somewhere at that point is what I'm going to do. Now, you did mention Takei, and God, I love him. He's like a national treasure. Who doesn't love him? But that makes me think of Star Trek. Now, you worked on Star Trek Into Darkness with Klingon, and you had to teach actress Zoe Saldana, right? Now, how did you get involved with that project, and how did you approach teaching Klingon to someone? She's new to this whole Star Trek franchise, so
although that's becoming her thing now, is doing alien languages.
Yeah, I know, but at the time, it wasn't.
She's one of the grand dames of alien languages now in Hollywood. She has two of them under her belt.
She's always like blue or green. Is it like
instead of Scream Queens, it could be
Conlang Queens.
Yeah.
Lang Queen.
Lang Queen, anything is possible. It really is. My path to doing that was that I did learn Na'vi, and I can speak Na'vi. And after that, I became interested in the fact that there was a large fan language around Vulcan. So I did a bunch of stuff on a website that was Vulcan related. And when the Star Trek franchise was looking for someone to teach Klingon as a dialogue or a dialect coach, they approached Paul Frommer, who is a good friend of mine now, and he said, well, if this is a Star Trek world and it's Star Trek related, you should maybe talk to Britton, because he knows about Star Trek more than I do. And this was because he knew that I had spent a lot of time on Vulcan stuff. So that was the connection to the production company, and I interviewed with them, and I basically took a bunch of my Klingon books and other stuff with me to the interview, and they hired me right there on the spot. So she approached Zoe, and there were two other originally in the production, two other primary speakers of Klingon, and then there was a whole crew of the guys in the battle, the stunt guys, who also came to Klingon class and learned several lines in case JJ wanted them to say them on the spot there during the performance. Now, none of that ended up in the final film, but I had Zoe plus two other excellent actors who learned their Klingon lines perfectly, and they're listed in the credits, Sean and Nick. And then there were some other guys who also learned a few lines. But we did classroom scenarios a couple of times. We chatted via Skype. Mark Okrand created all of the Klingon dialogue, of course, because he's the guy who does it. And he would send along sound files, and he would send along various ways to read that in the Roman alphabet. And we just did it like a classroom scenario first, and then we practice over Skype. And I was also on set on Kronos for 6 days to listen to all of the dialogue that was spoken. And if there was any kind of red flag or any kind of ad hoc coaching need to happen there on the spot, I was there to do it. So that was a fascinating experience. But it ended up happening because, I was well-versed in the way Klingon sounds. I'd had the dictionary since the 1980s. And I also had experience teaching people other languages. For example, even in high school, I taught some Spanish and Japanese to younger kids in middle school. So I had classroom experience, I had linguistic experience, I had experience with the Star Trek franchise to the extent that I was well versed in the lore of all the cultures and languages of Star Trek. And I had professional skills. I could show up and work with the people on the lot there in Culver City in Southern California in the same way that I'd work with high-tech consulting clients here in the Bay Area. So, I just took all of my experience and put it together, and it was great. It was a wonderful experience.
Cool.
Can you give us an example of Klingon?
Not to put you on the spot too much, but we're going to ask you to speak a few things in a few languages if you can.
Okay, well, I'll see. So for Klingon, the things that I know the best and remember the best from Klingon are some of the phrases from the original Klingon dictionary, like engage the cloaking device, and the very humorous which is revenge is a dish which is best served cold, which of course the Klingons claim is originally Klingon, but other people claim that it came from somewhere else.
To me it seems like Klingons are more hot-tempered and would wait for their revenge to be like at most lukewarm.
Yeah, they're pretty spicy, but they're also but they're also very careful in meting out. Yeah, they are very
But I don't.
So
I love Klingon. I think it sounds cool.
Well, it was designed to sound cool. I mean, it was designed to take sounds that all occur in natural languages and natlangs, but put them together in ways that do not typically occur in natlangs, so that it would sound alien. And Mark did that very intentionally.
In contrast, we'd like to hear something in Vulcan too.
Well, in Vulcan, the Vulcan I have to clarify is there are at least two different Vulcans. There are actually more than two different Vulcans. Over the years of the franchise, all kinds of different people have done different things.
Oh.
And so there are a few canonical things that have appeared in film that were done by Mark Okrand and a few other people who are not necessarily named in the canon. Vulcan is not as rough as Klingon, and Vulcan I don't know, it's inspired somewhat. I think there's some sounds from Semitic languages in it. So there's a ch, for example, which is also not alien to Klingon. I mean, yes, not alien to Klingon. But so for example, if I say my name is Britton, I just say Weemish Britton, or I might say Britton Weemish. And Weemish is just a verb like to be called, for example.
How do they say live long and prosper?
Live long and prosper is canonical from the first film, and it's diftor hesmusma. Diftor is an interesting verbal construction as reimagined by the fans who do the Fanlang, Fanlang, Fanlang Vulcan. Dif is a tiny little word that means long life. It means living a long time. Tor is a verb like do or make, which means do long life. And is and smusma is a word that means prosper. So a verb that means to prosper. So you take dif, which means long life, as a noun, put tor on the end of it, and that turns it into a verb. One way to make a verb in Vulcan, in Golic Vulcan, which is the Fanlang, and then the conjunction and smusma, which is a different word altogether, a different class of verb altogether.
So
which
diftor es musma.
Yeah, diftor hesmusma. Sorry, in that case is H-E-H. Yeah, diftor
hesmusma.
Diftor hesmusma.
That's cool, but Klingon sounds way cooler.
Well, again, Klingon was very intentionally designed to be something specific for a very different race. The Vulcans are more similar to humans, and can even crossbreed. Of course, the Klingons are supposed to be able to do that too now, but the origin though of this phrase "diftor hesmusma" was that language was originally recorded in English, so the performers were speaking in English. And they said live long and prosper. Well, you can count those syllables, live long and prosper. So someone had to come in and figure out how to say a correct number of syllables to make the lip movements match. So the origin of that language was kind of half by accident, the way it would sound and the way the things would flow, because they already had footage in the can that had English language lip movements. So the word together is tereter. The word for logic is ologica or ogica. So there are a lot of similarities between some of the words, canonical words in Vulcan, in Golic Vulcan, and the words that were originally spoken in English. So again, sometimes the history of why things get retconned or retroactively constructed.
Or for very practical reasons, yeah.
Or for very practical reasons, like we don't have the money to refilm that scene, and the actors are already on another project, so we have to make it work some other kind of way.
I love that.
And that kind of trickery or reverse engineering still goes on today a lot in movies that are probably being filmed right now. That will happen in some kind of way, shape, or form. And that just is because the production company, gets to the end, the director gets to the end, and they're like, I want to change this in this way. And the only way to do it is to futz around with the mouth movements and the sounds and the subtitles and whatnot. So yeah, it happens even
that happens,
today.
Yeah. Now, how would you say something in Na'vi from Avatar?
In Na'vi, well, for example, if I say my name in Na'vi has a very different pronunciation than Britain, it comes out as Britton in Na'vi. So if I say my name is Britton in Na'vi, I say Weru Siaufko Britton. And that means someone, anyone calls to me Britton, Britain.
That sounds so cool.
It's grammatically a little different, and it's also phonologically quite different than English. If I say I speak Na'vi fluently, I would say something like "Sun pibilte o Na'vi na hufwe." And that has adjective sounds, like in the verb to speak, pilte, there's an adjective sound, which is something that occurs in Mayan and it occurs in African languages, but doesn't happen in English ever.
Right. So, and it sounds like it's definitely an offshoot of Native American languages, some dialects. It sounds
they have glottal stops, which Na'vi has, and more common. And adjectives, again, occur in Mayan and some other Native American languages. A lot of North American languages actually have adjectives. So, they all, in those cases, they were all cool. Designed to fit a certain vibe that was important to the director or the production company.
Well, and it fit with the culture of the people there. They were very revered nature and lived in harmony with nature. So, you wouldn't think, it should sound like English.
And
we're not really known for that.
And in Na'vi, by the way, there's one word that means living in harmony with nature, living in balance with nature. And it's an 8-syllable word, meowa unia ea, but it's one word, just one word. Meowa unia ea is...
Because it's just such an integral concept to their culture that, they wouldn't have to explain it too much to each other.
Yeah, but the fact that it's long, that it's 8 syllables long, also implies that there could be a lot of backstory there as to where all those pieces and parts of what it means to them to live in nature. But we don't know what the etymology is, what the origin, the exact derivation.
It just implies that it's an evolved culture like any other. So that's neat.
Yeah, there's stuff going on in the background, and that makes the language richer, and having the language be rich makes the production richer. And that's why big budget Hollywood films and TV programs like Game of Thrones can go to the effort to have a real language, because then when the actors start performing in it and they do it consistently, scene after scene or episode after episode, the audience, even though the audience doesn't necessarily learn the language, they recognize it as a language the same way you would recognize Polish or Mandarin or Spanish or anything else that you might hear and recognize.
Yeah. That's just so cool.
For sure. And we probably should also mention
Yeah.
that there is a group for conlangers, the Language Creation Society.
Yeah, there are lots of different groups, but a good place to start if you're interested in constructed languages and don't know anything about it is the LCS, and that's conlang.org. And the LCS and lots of members of the LCS will be featured prominently in our documentary. One of the reasons that I had to get the project kicked off and going when I did is that the 6th Language Creation Conference just happened in the last few months in Horsham, which is outside of London. And there were 50, 60 people there from all over Europe and some from the US talking about constructed languages for 2 full days. And that conference happens every couple of years, and it's sponsored by the LCS. And the LCS, the Language Creation Society, actually came into being in order to foster and sustain that conference happening regularly. Because historically, people were conlanging, creating their own languages in complete isolation. They didn't even know that there was anybody else who did it. Then the internet came along, and it was easy to join a forum or join some kind of online community and talk about your language and share things about your language and learn how to do it from other people who had been doing it longer. But then people actually started meeting physically for the first time. And one of my favorite stories about the Language Creation Conference is that I met and interviewed someone who's really a linguistic prodigy, who's from my home state of South Carolina. I met him outside of London. He's currently going to school in Poland. But he met his new girlfriend at the Language Creation Conference outside of London, and then went to see her and visit with her before he went back to spend summertime with his family in South Carolina. So, it's important, I think, for constructed language people to realize that there are ways to actually meet. And sometimes you might be meeting a really important person in your life by making the effort to try to meet other people who do it, because it is a very specific hobby. It's a very specific interest. And the people who do it tend to be, in some cases quieter and more, erudite people who might tend a little bit more towards academia or something like that, but not necessarily. People who do it come from all stripes and all backgrounds and all cultures. And that I'm finding incredibly fascinating.
That is cool.
I think I'm going to make a new site, Conlang Dating.
You might have to charge. Conlangmingle.com. Yeah, there won't be a billion people on that site.
You have
I promise
to charge
you that.
everybody like $5,000.
Yeah, it's kind of a boutique. It's kind of a boutique hobby, but conlanging is surprisingly compatible with spouses who don't do it as well, as long as you're not too obnoxious about it.
And let me just say, as someone who's been married for many years, you master the art of sort of letting your eyes glaze over while nodding a lot and thinking about something else if it goes on too long. I mean, I know. Not that I've ever done that, babe. I'm just saying. I've heard.
I'm sure that there are a lot of conlangs that have a word for nodding while eyes glazed over.
And actually putting together like the grocery list or something in the back of your head.
Right. Yeah. Multitasking while ignoring conlanging spouse. Yeah.
That should definitely be a word. I mean, if you could come up with a word, Britton, for me, for like that would be awesome.
There needs to be a word for that. Yeah, I don't think there is.
I think if you'll just open up the comments on whatever this is, you probably get conlangers from all over the world volunteering great words for that.
I bet so. That can be like our secret word.
So let's talk about your film, Senn.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Speaking of with spouses, I'm sure.
Yes. Made that with your husband?
Well, Josh and I made Senn as a kind of it was his baby. I mean, it was totally his baby. It was his idea to do it, and I kind of came along for the ride as a producer and did do the constructed language Sinyamda for that.
There's a ton of it too.
There's a ton of it written
Yeah.
everywhere. Yeah, all over the place because we use that as a way to inexpensively augment the world building process and the set design and whatnot. So yeah, there's a ton of it written everywhere in countless typefaces. But in the bonus features, there's also some spoken Sinyamda
Yeah.
if people care about that. So
We did. We saw that. That was interesting. And the funny thing was, while we were watching it, and like the name of the place was something like Pyong, and then it showed the writing, and I was like, man, that just makes me think of North Korea.
well,
And then you say, you showed it to people in Japan, and they were like, oh, that seems vaguely Korean.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the inspirations for Pyom, it is Pyom,
Pyong.
Pyom,
That's
an
right. Yeah.
M on the end. Yeah. One of the inspirations for Pyom is some of the weirdness that goes on in North Korea in terms of social oppression and kind of cultural control and
Like
whatnot.
what little we even know about it, really, because it's so secretive. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So it really it lends itself to a lot of imagination getting put in there because you don't really know. You know it's not good, but
Yeah, and we did imagine if you're really interested in that, for example, in the backstory of what Pyom is really like, in the language document, which is available from the Fiat Lingua website, you can learn a lot more about the history of Pyom and why the language is like it is and what the culture is like on Pyom from that document. It's not in any of the bonus features per se in that level of detail, but there's a whole history of like how the planet got acquired and what the corporation did when it came in, and there's lots and lots of texture if you want to read that in that
yeah.
document. It's a
Well,
link to that's also available off the Senn website at
and I think it
Sennition.
also. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, the website for Senn is Sennition, SENNITION.com. And there's also a link you can find a link to the language document hosted on Fiat Lingua, which is an activity related to the Language Creation Society. You can find the document there if you care about the fuller history of Pyom. But it was partially inspired by North Korea, definitely.
And then also, I would imagine the corporatization of our own country as
Oh,
well.
certainly. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of kind of ironies in what goes on, and we made some actual decisions about the storyline based on cultures that evolve within large corporations.
Yeah.
Certain apathy for some things. Well, as long as we follow the rules, it doesn't matter how stupid something is, as long as we're following the rule.
Yeah.
In the film we show, but we don't go into any detail talking about the brainwashing that goes on with the machine, the kind of shoving people's faces in this bright light.
Mhm.
And that's purely our conceptualization of that is purely that they do that because the corporate rules don't allow them to easily execute anybody, but there's no rule against brainwashing people. So they just brainwash them so they can't talk essentially about
Yeah.
whatever the secret proprietary corporate information is that they know. So we looked at all kinds of things that do evolve, not just out of prison camps in North Korea, but also out of everyday decision making about how people's annual reviews are done in corporations
Well,
in North America.
and I found it disturbing but accurate. When you were talking about how the company needs them to be able to, read and write and everything, just what they need. They need them to be able to have just what they need to do the job and to be a good employee, because that is frightening because nowadays you hear people talking about educating our youngsters. I mean, not even college, but elementary school and high school. They're like, well, we just need to teach them what they need to know to get a good job in this area, and they don't need to know creative writing. They just need to know basic math. They just need to know, this and that. And it's the dumbing down because all we're interested in is having good corporate employees. And that's very real. That's very, very real today. You hear people on school boards, which is very disturbing, talking about, well, we just are interested in getting good future employees, not that we want to have an involved, educated citizenry.
Right.
We just want good corporate employees, and they don't even bother hiding it. But that is the goal.
I think that, and that expresses itself even when I was at university, there were a few classes that were just kind of general baseline, like I remember my psychology class, for example. The tests were all bubble tests. I mean, they're like you scribble in and fill in a circle on a multiple choice thing. And that has just evolved in the last 30 years or so to become this kind of horrific situation where teachers are not encouraged to teach creative thinking,
They serve the test.
Yeah.
They exist to serve the test, not the test exists to be an accurate measure of knowledge. They're there to serve the test.
Right, exactly. And, it's really quite, where it might go is really quite frightening. So when we were exploring unusual things in Senn, we were thinking about it really could, like, this is, although Pyom is not imagined as an evolution of our current culture on Earth, there's no reason that it couldn't go that way in some kind of timeline that's long enough. So yeah, one of the reasons I have to say that I find the world of constructed languages so fascinating is that people are taking things that we take for granted. Like the most basic skill that any human being has is the ability to communicate, to speak, right? Yeah. And we don't have to go in and surgically chop up our languages and take them apart and do all kinds of different things with them. We can just use English or use Spanish or use Chinese or use Japanese. We don't have to think about it. We don't even have to learn how to read and write it. We can just speak. And in a lot of cases, that's good enough. But what constructed language people do is go in and break everything down, not only from their own native language, but they look into Native American languages, they look into exotic languages from Papua New Guinea, other parts of the world, and they're really trying to figure out how it works and then creatively put it back together in experimental ways. So I think when we lose that ability to experiment and explore, then that's when we're really lost, because you really do get dumbed down into this complacency. And of course, 1984 in Newspeak, which is also a kind of foray into constructed language, the purpose of Newspeak in 1984 was to get people to fall in line with corporate ideas and corporate understanding and not challenge the system, don't challenge the status quo. And we actually looked at that a little bit, or I actually looked a little bit at that in Senn's language, in how they tried to simplify the language and standardize it so that it would be a better corporate tool. They didn't care about it as a tool for creativity. They just cared about it as a tool for using a worker base on a planet that they had acquired.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think you gave us an example of the language in use in English and in the language. I can't remember the name of the primary Senn language.
Yeah, it's called Sinyamda. Yeah, Sinyamda.
Uh-huh. So, do you want to introduce that audio piece?
Yeah. So the piece that I've provided to you is for part of the end of the monologue that's given by the primary female character Kana in our film, and you'll hear her say it in English, and then you'll hear her say it in Sinyamda, or the other way around if you choose to edit it that way. But I just wanted to have the opportunity for people who are really into the idea of the constructed language side of the film in the bonus features to get an idea of what they saw as the written language throughout the whole film, what it would sound like when Senn and Kana were actually speaking it with each other. So there are 5 or 6 different clips on the bonus features, and you will play one subset example of that where Kana is very concerned about what's going on with Senn.
Is it wrong of me to feel like having you here as you are is better than losing you entirely?
No.
Tu gem opra genenantur nampesh epunantira rininidru dabatanyama.
Yeah.
So how did you create that language? What was the foundation that you built off for that?
The linguistic side of it was not the most important thing. The orthography, the writing side of it, the way it would look on screen was the most important thing. So we started with making Josh as the director happy with what it was going to look like.
Always make the director happy, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the way a film production works, so that's why you do it that way, yeah. But the sound side of it and what the grammar would be like and all of that was just for me to play around with. And again, this didn't need to be my magnum opus, like it didn't need to be the most important Conlang thing I ever did in my lifetime. So I just took a lot of grammatical features from Japanese, a few from Thai, a few from Cherokee, which I've been studying not as fervently as I should be, but Cherokee.
That's very cool. Yeah.
Years. And I kind of crammed that with a little bit of Mandarin Chinese into a grammar and a phonology, and then just started making up words. So it wasn't incredibly sophisticated. I mean, the grammar is not at all like English. And again, if you're interested in the grammar, then you can find a link on the Sennition.com website to that document. But I took languages that were interesting and familiar to me and kind of easy for me. So I guess the core fundamentals of the grammar are based more on Japanese, and I speak Japanese fluently because I studied it before I lived there and then lived there for about 8 years as an adult, as a professional.
Wow.
So it's really much more like Japanese than it's like any of the other languages I mentioned. Although there's a lot about some of the verbal stuff and the way you can make nouns, make up new words that is more like Cherokee than it's like Japanese.
The writing's pretty much all over the place. I noticed in the behind the scenes footage that some of that was actually digitally added after the fact. How much did you have to make props to do that, and how much of it was digitally added in post?
I would say if it was doable on paper, we did it for real on paper because that's really easy to do today. We also had access to a laser cutter for a day, well, not a whole day, but like a few hours of one day. So some of the physical things like the badges that the workers wear and a few other little things that we could actually cut out of a plastic material or out of paper or heavy paper and use those. We did that with a laser cutter. But most of it, if there were steel pipes or there was a huge wall or there was anything that was not paper, essentially, or not a badge, or not something that we could use a stencil and spray paint it on. So there's some blankets and the T-shirt. One of the shirts, Kanna's shirt, was actually manufactured the way you would order anything from, off the internet. You just send a custom design and get a one-off T-shirt. Oh, yeah. But Senn's shirt, actually, that's all sprayed on there. So it was red spray paint painted on his shirt.
Oh, cool.
But the digital stuff, if we had metal pipes or we had a wall, for example, the writing needed to be up on a huge wall, or we had some Creative Commons footage from Nairobi, for example, and there's a huge billboard in that and we needed to replace it with Sinyamda, we did that digitally. But as much as possible, even in the case of things where we probably could have fudged it on screen, we made real props. There were a couple of signs that were supposed to look like rusty old metal plates that were actually plastic or styrofoam or thick cardboard that we painted to look like metal and then rusted it. So yeah, it depended on whatever that was the quickest and cheapest and most reliable, easy way to do it.
Well, you did a lot of other visual effects.
Mm-hmm. I'm assuming there wasn't really a giraffe or kangaroo there.
Yeah, and how hard was it to get the bed there, like in that rocky creek?
Well, the bed was super easy. The bed
you were able to carry it?
Well, it's like any bed. It's basically 4 pieces: the headboard, the footboard, and 2 side rails. It was free off of Craigslist. Somebody was giving it away.
Oh, and nice.
The bed was a free prop, and we just carry it down into the creek and set it up. And we had to initially reposition one rock, I think, for it to sit on. But there were 3 others there that were just kind of perfect. So we moved one rock around, and that was where we always set it up. We left it set up as much as possible. But one night, it was while we were like 2 days between filming, we just left it set up. And we had this freak rain that never happens in California in the summer. And it rained
Especially
on
in
the
a
bed.
drought. Yeah.
It rained on the bed, and the bed part of it started delaminating. The veneer was coming off of it. So,
Oh no.
All kinds of stuff ends up happening
You're
during
like,
production.
man, all we had to do was put a tarp, and we didn't, because you're in a drought.
I rushed down in the rain to buy a tarp at the hardware store, and rush back up and dry the bed off and cover it with the tarp. And of course, within an hour of my doing that, it stopped raining. But you never know.
That's how it always goes.
Yeah.
And that was really cool.
The giraffe, though, there are actually 3 different giraffes. It's like having twins or triplets play one character in a movie with their kids. There are actually 3 different giraffes in the film. One is an African giraffe for the long shot, and then in the close-ups, there are two different giraffes who end up on screen, or maybe only one of them ended up in the final cut. But one of them was just at the zoo. And the long shot where the whole giraffe is standing in the creek, that's actually Creative Commons footage where the giraffe is originally standing on the Serengeti or just standing in a plain, in Africa. And the lighting just happened to be perfect to look like it was dappled lighting coming through trees. So,
yeah.
And then the close-up giraffe, the winking giraffe at the end, was shot at the San Francisco Zoo.
Ah, cool.
There's a lot of rotoscoping going on, a whole lot more rotoscoping than I will ever care to do again. And the only thing that I rotoscoped was the kangaroo, and that just drove me crazy. And I swore that I would never, ever, ever, ever do it again. It's amazing how much kangaroos' ears move while they're not doing anything.
Those are the things you don't think about until you go, man, why did I pick a frickin' kangaroo?
That rotoscoping that kangaroo is one of the...
Could have been a raccoon or something, An elephant
how about
that doesn't move. Well, the elephant's a flap.
A snail would have been good.
Yeah.
A snail that moves faster.
I was really, animals tend to move. I mean, I guess you could have gotten an alligator while it's like just laying there with its jaw open or something, but real still.
There was an idea to have some other animals in the film as well, but we didn't really need them in the end.
And then you realized what a pain in the keister it was to
well, yeah, they all had to be rotoscoped to get them in there. So it was.
Oh, you mean you didn't get to rent the zoo animals?
Well, there is a safari park about 40 minutes from here, and they do have at least one giraffe. And I was like, I wonder if the giraffe would like to have a little road trip, but it made much more sense to do it digitally. And all of the Australian animals were just a kind of Circe. They were a serendipity because after we finished primary shooting, we were on vacation for about 2.5, almost 3 weeks in Australia. So we actually shot all of those Australian animals. The cassowary and there were actually some other Australian animals we didn't put in, but the cassowary and the kangaroo we shot again at a kind of animal park, a kind of zoo-like place in northern Australia in Queensland. So that I felt super happy about getting them in there because they were unexpected to us as well. We didn't know that we'd actually be able to film Australian animals.
It was serendipitous.
Yeah, it was great.
We like the actor who played Wee.
Yeah. He cracked me up.
Yeah, he
goofy
was fantastic
in real life. Is he goofy in real life?
He can be goofy in real life, but he was inspired by being in seeing how our film turned out to make his own film. And he's making a really serious, it's a short, but it's a really serious sci-fi short now called The Toll. He stars in it, but he also is producing it. He got a different director, and she's great, Liz. But The Toll, I think, will be something that your audience and both of you would enjoy seeing very much too. I expect it to be kind of in the 20-minute range. Mm-hmm. And it's an alternate reality, alternate timeline kind of look at what might have happened around the end of World War II.
Oh, cool.
And it's really, really good and interesting. And Josh is actually doing some of the special effects on that project for Wiley.
Keep us updated on that, because that
Yeah,
sounds really cool.
people can go find it on Facebook or go find the website, The Toll. The film is called The Toll, and it's being done by Wiley Herman.
I love how his outfit kept changing, and like it would just change like in the same scene. And I think my favorite was when he's trying to help the humans feel comfortable. So he's like, I'm cooking, and he's got like this girly apron on and a grill with a watermelon on it, and the watermelon catches fire.
Yeah, well, we wanted
I loved it.
Yeah, we wanted him to come across as trying really hard to seem normal to human beings, but really not having a clue how to do it.
He never met any before, I mean, you wouldn't have a clue what to do to make an alien feel comfortable,
Right. Yeah, so we had a lot of fun with that stuff.
And he's so dry. I mean, he was so serious through the whole. Oh man, it's great. We cracked up. It was awesome.
Yeah, he's a great guy. We loved working with him, and we were, it was hard to cast that role because we had a few. I mean, it really came down to two different people, and they both would have been great in that role, but Wiley had this really special ability to come across as both kind of ominous and frightening, but also be a teddy bear too, and for you to really want to love him, even if you were kind of afraid of what he was, So,
well, he's ominous and frightening because he's just so different and powerful and a sort of a higher level being in a lot of ways, but teddy bearish in his just completely innocent attempts at trying to seem like I'm here for you and I want to make you, but it just missing the mark and having no clue that he's even missing the mark.
Yeah, we love humor. I mean, and kind of different humor, alternative humor, not necessarily slapstick stuff that's more kind of funny, weird, as opposed to weird, or funny. So. Yeah. I think Wiley was great. And the people who appreciate the humor, and even though it's not, I mean, it's fundamentally not a comedy in any way, shape, or form, but having humor in it is like having humor in real life. Even when there are terrible things going on in real life, people who have a good outlook on life tend to find humor even in really dark times. So we wanted a combination of humor and seriousness in the film. Yeah, definitely.
Well, and I think people have gotten used to that. I mean, back in the day, MASH really perfected that formula. I mean, there's nothing more serious than war and death and maiming and everything else, but, they always manage to find the humor in the moment as well. So
yeah, you have to.
You have to, because if you were transported on some alien ship and had no idea what you were in for, I mean, if you don't find ways to release some steam and chuckle and kind of enjoy yourself, you're going to go mad.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, yeah. But some of the humorous things, like cow juice, for example, that's again something out of my family. See, that's my brother joking with my nephew about cow juice, and I'd never thought about it that way. But the way you say it in Chinese and Japanese is kind of similar to that too. I mean, it's kind of like that. So, I mean, he is very logical to the extent that he's able to be logical in a human way. Yeah. So we thought that he might call it cow juice.
So that makes sense, though. In the language, that would have been a closer translation. It was just sort of a language kind of quirk.
Yeah, again, it's playing with language. Yeah, it's language.
So before we go, you mentioned a lot of links, a lot of different projects.
Yeah, if you could list them all.
Yeah, can you tell our listeners where they could find you and your projects online?
So the current documentary is everything that you'll need to know, including how to get to Facebook and other places from there, is at conlangingfilm.com. That's Conlang, CONLANGING, film, FILM.com, conlangingfilm.com. Mm-hmm. The Senn project, including the ability to buy the film or find out where to watch it online for free or to buy the bonus materials, for that you go to sennition.com, SENNITION.com, sennition.com. And for Vulcan stuff, You can find that at corsaya.org, KORSAYA.org. And I think that should pretty much do it. And I hope everybody will go explore whatever sounds like it might float your boat.
Yeah, it all sounds really interesting.
Yeah, and I'm very much looking forward to the documentary. And lastly, we've been asking our guests what their favorite quote from a fictional character is. Now, that can mirror your worldview, mean something special to you, or just be something funny. Do you have a quote?
Well, I think one of my favorite quotes on the serious side of Senn, out of one of our fictional characters, is when Kana says in our film, "You almost worship it and you don't even know what it is." I think that what we want to encourage everybody to do, whether it's with conlanging or with filmmaking or with just enjoying films, is to stimulate your brain and to encourage people to not fall into some bubble test, fill in the blank kind of well in their life, but to be inquisitive, to be curious, and to challenge things. So that's why I like Kana's challenge to we. It sounds like you worship it and you don't even know what it is. You need to question things. You need to figure out why you believe what you believe.
Live the examined life. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Live the examined life. So that's what I'll throw out as one of my favorite quotes. I have tons of others, but I might as well pick one from our own film.
Hey there, this is Robert Leeshock, best known for playing Liam Kincaid on Gene Roddenberry's Earth Final Conflict. And you're listening to GenreTainment.
Well, thanks to Britton for the information-packed interview. We have all links mentioned included on the show notes at sci-fi-pulseradio.com.
So it's almost here, our 100th episode.
Woohoo!
I can't believe we made that many episodes already.
I know.
It
doesn't feel an episode beyond 98.
No, I know, right?
Yeah.
It'll be a special episode with a few of our past guests, one of which is our very first guest returning to the show, Emmy-winning writer Victor Miller. You might know him from writing a film called, Friday the 13th.
I think a few people might have seen that.
Maybe. Now we will also have SFP Now's host Ian Conlang join us. He's always a hoot.
He is a hoot.
And also International Academy of Web Television Chairman Jeff Burns. You might remember him from our recent game show episode with the hosts of Super Geeked Up.
Yeah.
Or the episode where we interviewed him and the cast of Super Knocked Up, which led to a funny blooper episode with that same...
Oh yeah, a little blooper mini episode with the cast, so that was funny.
And of course, we're busy lining up guests for the next 100 episodes, including a return visit from writer Christy Marks.
She has written for classic animation series like G.I. Joe, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and Jem and the Holograms, for comic books like Sisterhood of Steel, Amethyst, Sword of Sorcery, and Birds of Prey, and also writing for all sorts of video games and TV shows. And she is also the author of the book Writing for Animation, Comics and Games, and she has a cool last name. Okay, yeah, Marks actually did make me say that. Co-host Marks, not Christy Marks, just to be clear. Now, before we go, we want to remind you that you can keep track of us on our GenreTainment Facebook page, Marks' Twitter account, which is @MrMarks, our website at GenreTainment.com, or all of the shows at SciFiPulseRadio.com.
So that's it for today's GenreTainment. We'll be back soon with all new guests from our favorite films, TV shows, novels, and web series.
GenreTainment is a production of Alien Jungle Bug Productions. Until next time. Bad monkey.